Do you think it's a possibility that we're living in a simulation? Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined with a man who needs no introduction, Rob Hamilton. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Luke. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. So everybody's talking about the recent rise of technology. Everybody's talking about AI. Chat GPT is going absolutely viral. I believe it's actually the fastest application to ever reach 1 million downloads. I think it did that in like 5 days. So a lot of people right now are saying, hey, we're living in this world with rampant technological innovation. But I think you wrote a very, very interesting article around 1.5 years ago talking about, hang on a minute, maybe our technological innovation isn't as fast as most people are claiming it is. So, Rob, maybe we can just start by talking about the Great Stagnation at a very high level.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the inspiration for this was I've been in Bitcoin since 2013, and I was getting more actively engaged with the larger community of people talking about Bitcoin during the pandemic. So sitting inside, there is still an app called Clubhouse. And on Clubhouse, it's a social audio platform, very much akin now to what you have with Twitter Spaces. And what was really cool about Clubhouse and all of the Bitcoin rooms is that we kind of ran our own little mafioso gang of all of our buddies like talking about Bitcoin all the time. And we would go into other finance rooms and science rooms and kind of find ways to talk about Bitcoin. It's when started getting a lot of interaction with Eric Weinstein. And it was very enlightening hearing and talking to him about, Bitcoin, his views on technology. And I had listened to his podcast for years before ever getting on the app of Clubhouse, talking with him directly about Bitcoin. And his opening podcast called The Portal, the first episode was a 3-hour conversation with Peter Thiel talking about the embedded growth obligations and stagnation. And that's just to directly answer your question. And I'm kind of calling that out up front. Just if any of this is interesting to you, you want to learn more, I would check out that podcast. It's really great content. That said, has been a big split since the late 60s, early 70s on a lot of technological advancement happening in the world of computers or the world of bits, as opposed to the world of atoms. We used to have supersonic air travel. You used to be able to go from New York City to London in 2 hours with the Concorde. That got canceled. It's no longer something that we do anymore. We put all of this effort into nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles during World War II. And then when the war ended, everything kind of just stopped. We went to the moon, and we haven't been back to the moon for 50 years. It's all of these things when you look back and saying, yes, there is amazing technology advancements because of Moore's Law. And Moore's Law is the principle of roughly every 18 months, computational efficiency doubles. And this involves with semiconductors and kind of the distance between the wires and the chips. It's something that we're actually starting to hit up against a physical limit of right now, which is kind of its own subsection of a conversation. All that to be said, a lot of our technological advancement and advancements in quality of life have been coming from the world of bits and atoms and bits and not atoms. And AI is a really interesting build on top of that too. I used to be a data scientist and consultant at IBM, and you were starting to see kind of at the rate stuff advances where this was going to be in 5 to 10 years. And we're, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're still going to see these compounding advancements, but we're still not going to the moon. Like Elon Musk is this one maverick who kind of pushes against the grain and is actually moving forward with what it looks like for physical space travel and infrastructure. But a lot of what we see today is kind of the same of Eric Weinstein puts it as, if you were to take a room that you're in today and you removed all of the screens, short of the aesthetic element, it's basically the same room. There hasn't been really any big changes in how anything is being done. And it's just an interesting way to look at when we feel like we're in a world that's constantly changing and kind of shifting around all the time. If you take a step back and see where's that change happening and where it's not happening, leads to some interesting conversations.
Yeah, that Weinstein analogy is a really interesting one with the screens in the room. I know there's another one Peter Thiel uses where he says, imagine we're in a, what's the cartoon show again? Battlestar Galactic, where he's talking about...
Yes, with Star Trek. Star Trek.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Had a brain fart on air. We have the supercomputer, but we haven't built the holodeck, the replicator, and the warp drive. Is that right?
Right. That's right.
there's lots of these really interesting analogies to think about how our physical world has stagnated for the past 50 years and all the innovations been in the digital world. Another one I use is, if you look back 250 years ago, we were literally living in farms and villages. And over 250 years, we've been transported to living in these industrial societies, in these big mega cities, and we've invented steam engines, railways, steel, electricity, the internet, the microprocessor, and we've gone from using wood as an energy source to using coal, oil, and now hopefully more dense forms of energy like nuclear in the future. So all of that's happened in 250 years, from like the 1770s to the 1970s. And since the 1970s, we've done squat. Like you said with the moon, I think that's another really interesting kind of parallel to get people thinking about the fact that, don't we have like 5 million times more compute power today than we did in the 1970s? Yeah. That was another really interesting tidbit you popped in your article, and it really does make you think.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like the equivalent computational power of like a graphing calculator that sophomores use in high school is what got us to the moon, right? Like how far we've advanced. And one of like the big impromptu like urges that got me to want to write that article is they spend 3.5 hours talking about this stagnation and the changes in society. And Peter Thiel says it was sometime between 1966 and 1968. And Eric's like, it was between 1970 and 1972, which brings in WTIF happened in 1971. Like they spend 3 hours talking about this significant shift in society, and they don't talk about the money, the going off the gold standard and kind of the debasement of money at all, which to me seemed like a huge missed opportunity. And this is where a lot of the conversation started happening with Eric saying like, hey, isn't it interesting? You have this timeline and sequencing of events. And we also in Bitcoin really care about that window right around 1971 from a developmental shift in society. We would kind of, trade ideas back and forth on Clubhouse. But that was one of the big prompts for me was the ideas were not mine, to be clear. Like, this is, Eric Weinstein and Peter Thiel, two very smart men talking about these problems, but they hadn't put on the Bitcoin lens of looking at the problem through that context. And when we're talking about technological stagnation, I view money is a technology, because money is, it's this idea of how do we trade economic value and information amongst each other and understanding like from an accounting system. And it's gone through many iterations. I love Nick Szabo's article, Shelling Out, talking about the original nature of like what actually made money in like tribal eras and, using wampum shells, right? And there were things that had low liquidity. You would maybe once a generation when you died, you would transfer it, but it was very kind of like tightly held. But as technology advanced, people realized, we can use gold coins and then we can use accounting ledgers, right? And then Bitcoin is this new accelerated jump on top of that for more efficient ways of being able to exchange information and money without having the need for fraud, or kind of the inevitable outcome of fraud like you would have in other systems. Bitcoin's kind of solved that problem, the double spend problem, the Byzantine generals problem. So viewing Bitcoin as this great conduit for being able to transform and kind of reset some of these stagnation patterns into a more prosperous future.
It's a beautiful thing. And that's what I really liked that your article did, and applied the Bitcoin lens to a problem that, a lot of the technology guys don't, look at a problem through the Bitcoin lens with. Rob, something else I definitely wanted to get into, we talked about stagnating growth, and something else that Peter Thiel and Eric Weinstein talked about in that 3-hour interview was when you have stagnating growth, typically violence tends to pop up. So maybe we can go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and so this is just like a general animal social pattern. This is not really something even specific to humans. When you feel like the pie is naturally growing, and this can be, in a human sense, kind of the economy and prosperity, you have net growth there, the pie is getting larger and larger. So you have a better sense of free trade. But if you have growth stagnate, everything now becomes a zero-sum game. The resources that exist are all that will ever exist. If I take something, it's necessarily at your loss. And this is, what a lot of, Eric and Peter talk about is that their emphasis is making sure growth does not stagnate, because when that pie stops growing, people get a lot more territorial and conflicts are more likely to spike up. This is something that's very interesting just from just looking back on times of history. There's quotes saying that, when goods no longer cross borders, troops will. And it's that same idea that economic prosperity, has a lot of great upsides in actually being able to, stave off physical conflict. And it's something that to be really kind of concerned about when goods stop transferring around, which was at the time I wrote that article, it was still like during reeling and trying to figure out what post-COVID looked like. And we told the whole world to stop trading. Like everyone just stopped, no one go anywhere, no one do anything. And we're still trying to like very slowly lurch our way forward into a post-COVID era of like, what does it mean for economic trade and activity? All kind of very largely uncharted waters though. So that's something that I put a lot of thought into when I was writing the article, was understanding, looking back at historic patterns from 1970 to today, where did that growth kind of stop? And what are the kind of new games we tried to put in place to make it look like there was growth, which I tie into was a lot of the money printing and debasement of the money was that, well, we can't actually create net new productivity and growth. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make a shell game where we print more dollar units and it feels like everything's growing when you actually just have wealth extraction out the back, by the Cantalon Effect.
Exactly. And Cantalon Effect, you actually just triggered something in my mind there. I think American HODL talks about how Bitcoin's going to be the last Cantalon Effect. Maybe we can explain that one for the listeners, because I think that's a really interesting.
Yeah. So in Bitcoin, we kind of have a general thesis among most participants that use Bitcoin, in that Bitcoin will continue to accrue an increased value compared to fiat units because they have to keep on printing and debasing the money. So you actually have this one-time generational opportunity to be able to get a very disproportionate increase in the value of your assets as a consequence of the falling value of fiat currency. And what American HODL calls it, is this one-time Cantalon effect, is that we're going to be great benefactors of being able to kind of pattern match and see this happening. And his call to action is, as the new wealth class, we should be destroying our Cantalon effect by investing and deploying that capital into building the future ecosystem we all want to live in. And that if you've been in Bitcoin for, coming up on 10 years and you've already had a couple 100x under your belt, the marginal utility that each little extra bit of Bitcoin you have is much lower than if you were to say invest in the larger ecosystem and being able to build out that infrastructure and kind of neutralizing some level of your Cantalon effect. That was kind of like, that was from his BitBlock Boom talk, I think from 2020. But yeah, he has a great talk. He goes and talks about that. He kind of looks at too as like you had the PayPal Mafia and Web 2, in the 90s with Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Elon Musk. You had this whole cadre of people. He views it almost as like you also have the Bitcoin Mafia, the people that were here for a very long time, and they build their own social networks and their own capital networks as well. And what they're doing is they're kind of plowing that network effect of trust and doing how to work with back into the ecosystem for other investments and other founders and other companies and opportunities.
I like that, the Bitcoin Mafia. That's got a really nice ring to it. Where are you going to deploy your eggs, Rob? What areas do you think the world most needs our capital in the future?
Interesting, yeah. So for me, I think there's still a lot of core Bitcoin financial infrastructure that needs to still be fleshed out. I think Bitcoin could survive without another major fork or upgrade or change, but we still need to get a lot of tooling and user experience dialed in to make it usable for the next, 10 to 100 million people. What I'm personally working on, as a very brief aside, is I founded a company in March of last year called Ancho Watch, which is a nautical term referring to the crew of sailors who watch the ship at night while it's at anchor, think like a night's watch. And we're working on insurance solutions for Bitcoin so that you're able to have access to your money, know that someone else can't run off with it. But in, the tragic event of, you were to have like a flood or a fire, or someone came to your house to try and do a $5 wrench attack, you still can have safety and security that you have access to your money, which I don't want to get too deep in the technical details, leverages some really compelling stuff that works in Bitcoin today called Miniscript, which is a more advanced smart contracting. So as opposed to maybe normal multi-sig where you have 2 of 3 keys, each key is equal. In Miniscript, you can have a hierarchy of keys, which is great for making sure that you don't have to worry about counterparties running off with your money. And you can use things like time locks to make sure that you can always have access to your money in certain contingency situations. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds there, but that's been my main focus for the past year now, building that company. It's been a very long and rewarding grind that I look forward to probably taking another decade before I'll be able to put it behind me.
Yeah, that's very cool. And for anyone who's more interested in that, I'd highly encourage you to go listen to the interview you recently did on Citadel Dispatch. I believe that was well over 2 hours, that one. And I learned a lot from it. I've got a page full of notes. So any of the listeners want to learn more about Miniscript and Bitcoin Script, I'd encourage you to go and listen to that one and bring your notebook and a big mug of coffee, because it is a very insightful episode. But I think like Bitcoin insurance is something that just hasn't seen enough innovation. So I think that's really cool for you to be working on that problem in the Bitcoin space.
Thanks. Yeah, it's there hasn't been much innovation because no one's been really working on it. Today, everyone leaves their money, if they're going to leave it at a custodian that has fractional insurance, and it's kind of an artifact of legacy banking models. Like, why would I have one company I leave all my money with? We have programmable money in Bitcoin. We should be able to fracture this across multiple institutions, which allow you to mitigate against internal collusion, like my family trying to run off with my money, or external collusion where I don't have to worry about the custodian. If I only have one custodian who's holding my keys, that one custodian gets compromised, they may be able to run off with my money. But having this distribution of risk by multiple counterparties, I think is going to be the way large enterprise, institutional, big amounts of money are going to be stored, in 5 years' time.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's definitely the way to be going. And so it's definitely good to be getting your foot in the race before most people figure out what's going on.
That's right.
Rob, I'd love to maybe talk a little bit more about these things called embedded growth obligations, because you touched on that earlier when we were talking about the stagnation, but we didn't really explore that one. So maybe you could lay out for the listeners what they are.
Yeah. So an embedded growth obligation, as Eric calls it, is the baseline growth rate an institution has to have to keep its honest positions. I have a couple examples in the article. One of the ones I think is very straightforward to think about is let's say you have a law office. And in this law office, you have a bunch of junior associates that just are fresh out of law school, and you have a certain amount of the partners at the law firm. You hit a certain rate of growth in larger society where you may not be able to get every single person who's working as an associate get promoted to partner, because you then need to have a new swath of people coming in to work underneath those partners. Another way of looking at this too is like a university professor. If a university professor is teaching 15 grad students for their PhD program, and they all want to become professors, they all can't become professors. There's not enough department availability across all of the colleges and universities. So this is where you actually start getting institutions acting a bit sociopathic or pathological. And with, I think, a really great example of this from the university system is making student debt in the United States illegal to be waived in bankruptcy. Because what would have happened in a normal market system is if you went into an overcrowded field and you paid a lot of money to get an education, and then there was no employment opportunity for you on the other side of that, you would declare bankruptcy. Sure, you would take a hit on your credit score. Maybe you couldn't get another banking loan for a couple of years, but you would get that debt discharged and you can move on with your life. The problem is then is if that were to happen, the universities would be impaired because they would not be getting as much money flowing in from easy capital. Mm-hmm. But when you make it illegal in the United States to be able to discharge your debt, you're getting people pulled in. They're still talking about the great benefits of education. Like, I have a bachelor's degree. I got a bachelor's degree in math and economics. Do I think it materially added to my marketability in the job market, like in my skill set in the job market? No, most of the stuff that I learned and did was stuff I taught myself on the job. I also taught myself how to program. I didn't go to school for programming, but I then went and taught myself how to program and became a data scientist and consultant. Like, it's one of these things where you really have to look back and question what was the actual net economic value here. And the way I'm more cynically looking back on it is that the institution of the university was just trying to get bodies in the door to extract capital so that they can perpetuate their institution. It wasn't actually about the betterment of the students or, giving them the life skills necessary to be a better employee or having the skills, to be a productive member of society. It was about getting everyone in the door and, charging them with a lot of debt. And because the nature of the markets in the United States, especially, they always can just increase the tuition because the student loan infrastructure will always just match whatever the university is asking them to pay. So it becomes like this parasitic wealth extraction engine as opposed to being something that's a higher institution for learning. So this is the idea of an embedded growth obligation that because society at large is kind of starting to contract a bit, you go from 7% of people who have higher education in the 70s to 50%. They're trying to grow and grow and grow so that they can get more university heads, more departments, more revenue coming in. And then it becomes just very detrimental and actually subverting the whole point of what the institution's trying to do. And this is, an idea of an embedded growth obligation that just has very negative impacts across society. When these institutions like universities are supposed to be these sense-making organs and that are supposed to be looking at the larger world and understanding how everything's interacting with each other and training the next generation of leaders, when they're kind of foregoing their responsibility to society just to try and extract more wealth, it becomes parasitic, and then you can't trust these institutions, and you get this decay of institutions. You get, the best players don't find this game of just wealth extraction very interesting. They go off and do other things. So you get B and C tier players running these institutions, which causes this massive decay over time. And it's very just detrimental to society at large. And you can't then trust your institutions. So there's sleep at the wheel for a decade. And then, you could look at all of the COVID mess and how these different countries were managing it. It was pretty obvious that certain things like, Anthony Fauci at the start saying, you don't need a mask. You don't need a mask. You find out later it's because they were hoarding all of the medical equipment for the universities and for the hospitals. And it's this idea of a noble lie. It's that's not your job. Your job is, as someone who's paid by the tax base of your country, is to be honest to your citizens. And now all of a sudden you're realizing they have hidden preferences, and they were trying to, lie to the general public to try and help the right people. And then you destroy all trust. You can't take someone seriously after they've shown to be lying to you. Not only that, but then, months later saying, well, you have to wear a mask. It's a requirement. And it doesn't make sense where you can be someone saying, you don't need a mask, it's not needed, to a few months later saying you must wear a mask, and I'm supposed to take that dictate seriously. And it's you've already shown that you've had a propensity to lie based on hidden motives that are not known to the larger public. I don't think it's wrong for someone to then question power structures and understanding what are other hidden motivations that people have, and kind of their hidden preferences and their revealed preferences based on their actions.
Yeah, it's a great point. And this whole idea of embedded growth obligations, it kind of weaves itself into the 90-year fourth turning cycle as well, because that cycle and that book kind of predicts that we're living through a period of time where our institutions are becoming questioned more and more, and the populace are going to rise up and demand change. Another really interesting example you laid out in the article was talking about stock buybacks, and you used IBM in particular as an example of it. I thought that was fascinating. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I believe has IBM almost done more stock buybacks than their total market cap is?
Yeah. So over 30 years, I'm looking at the number right now. So IBM in the past 30 years did $200 billion in stock buybacks. And for those that aren't familiar, a stock buyback is at the end of the quarter, you have a certain amount of net cash flow profit balance that's on your balance sheet. And you can choose to deploy that capital in several different ways. One of them, and maybe IBM in its early years would have done this, is they would have invested in a moonshot project, something that would have taken maybe 10 years to get paid out on. Things like, Watson, which in IBM Deep Blue, which was the supercomputer that beat Garry Kasparov in chess. These are things that you don't just turn the switch on and have the AI there. Those are things that take, at that time, it took a decade plus to be able to get these level step functions in progress. The problem, though, is that IBM as a company, the executive team gets compensated largely, like most other publicly traded companies, based on their stock options. Their stock options are supposed to incentivize them because they're there to create shareholder value on the executive team and to get you skin in the game aligned. They want to pay you mostly in stocks. Here's the problem, though. If IBM for the past 30 years has done $200 billion in stock buybacks, the entire company today is only worth $129 billion. So they put more money into buying back their own stock than the value of the entire company is at currently. And this is, I view as an idea of an embedded growth obligation, because everyone's being judged on a quarter-to-quarter basis. They need to grow. They need to hit their next number of goals. The easiest thing to do is take the extra cash flow you have on hand, buy back some stocks that are out in the market, and it increases the stock price. You put more money in, stock price number goes up. But it's totally foregoing the future growth of the company, because instead of, maybe investing that in a, we could have maybe had Chat GPT 10 years ago if IBM wasn't kind of dawdling around buying stock buybacks, and they were actually trying to do step function innovations in AI and chat processing, right? It's somewhat of a hidden unknown cost, because you don't know what the counter truth is if they had spent, instead of $200 billion in stock buybacks, they did $200 billion in AI research, where it would be. You can't definitively say that, but it's not unreasonable to say that the past 30-year strategy at IBM, just deploying money into stock buybacks, was not a good economic decision, because they could have used that money for something else. And this all ties into, kind of the moneyness that's leaked into the stock market, because the money's broken, because the dollar does not preserve purchasing power anymore. Stocks have become proxies for moneyness. The moneyness leaks into these other instruments like a security. And people put their money in securities because the U.S. dollar is debasing. They don't want to hold cash is trash. I'm going to put my money in something else that produces positive, cash flows. The problem, though, is that it's not really actually a good steward of capital, because, you put $200 billion in and you have $120 billion after the fact. You had a profitable business before you started putting money into those stock buybacks. So it's just pure wealth destruction, just destroying of money. And maybe that's more of a commentary on IBM kind of, being an innovator in the 70s, and they've kind of have not been in the forefront since maybe the 90s. So they have 30 years of kind of stalling out themselves. And maybe more of those capital gains went to companies like Apple and, Google. But it's all to say, at the end of the day, these perversions of like embedded growth obligations and like an institutional corruption take on many different forms. And I think the Bitcoiner case is that, because the money broke down, the technology of money has stopped working. We're dealing with a lot of these negative consequences, and I think that's something that our conversations on Clubhouse, whenever we would talk with Eric Weinstein, he would think that first, he wouldn't be viewing it from the money perspective. He'd be saying technology broke. I'm trying to understand why. I would say, well, money broke, and because money as a capital allocation technology broke down, we're getting a stagnation in the technology.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think if you're going to talk about technology, if you're not going to talk about money, I think you're not considering the whole picture. So again, I love how we've inserted Bitcoin as the ultimate technology, money, into that conversation. I think that's a very, very important thing to do, and something we should continue to do with the technology crowd.
Yeah, it's the coordination among individuals. So it's very, very important for, whether you're going to buy water, you're going to buy land, you're going to buy food, whatever, like all the very robust, complicated, unknown, larger society, everything is being coordinated by everyone's own motivations, because price is a signal. And when you have people converge on supply and demand converge on something, you get price action, you get to abstract so many complicated details that you'll never be able to fully grasp your mind around, because you get paid a certain amount of money, you have a budget, and you have to allocate those resources accordingly. When that technology breaks down, you basically have markets and like larger price systems lying to you, which can be causing a lot of problems. I mentioned before, like student loans. Way too expensive, not actually generating too much value because it's heavily subsidized, because government comes in and they interfere with the pricing function. If you actually could discharge your debt, if you could declare bankruptcy because it wasn't productive, and you didn't have government subsidizing, you would be able to get much lower expenses for tuition. That's where you can actually see priceflation indexes over the past 10, 20 years. College, I forget the exact numbers offhand, but college tuition over the past 30 years has doubled and quadrupled. And the price of computers has gone down and down, while the computational efficiency has gone up. It's why you can get like a $500 really nice flat screen TV, but compared to something that maybe 30 years ago is a huge improvement, because that's just kind of sitting on top of that Moore's law and that compounding of the advancement in bits. But plane ticket, you get much lower quality of service with much more instability. Flights are getting canceled all the time now. We had that happen like 2 weeks ago. The entire government flight system shut off. Like, it's just very weird. You're just starting to see pricing signals break down. I think we're still trying to figure out post-COVID how you're supposed to turn an economy back on, which is not a very natural thing to do. To stop it, pull the emergency brake and turn it back on. I think we're still trying to go through the motions and getting that all sorted again. But it may very well take another 10 years, like if not longer. It all really depends. There's just it's a very complicated system that we've been messing around with, and we're trying to figure out what happens when you try and influence it and think that you know better than the larger collective group of independent actors.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about complex systems. We really shouldn't be messing with them and putting our finger in the honey jar. Rob, so obviously you've also done a really interesting podcast there with Peter McCormack talking about the risks of hyper-Bitcoinization. So we kind of talked about how these institutions are framed, they're becoming more and more untrusted, and a lot of us in the Bitcoin space would assume that we're going to end up on some sort of a Bitcoin standard in the future. Where do you see the risks? Is it in the transition, or are you more concerned about how does society look like once we're there?
Yeah, that podcast I did in April of last year. So this was something that if you've been around Bitcoin for a while, there's just everyone goes through stages in their development and their journey. And for me, I leaned on this Alexander Solzhenitsyn line, that the line between good and evil runs down the center of every man's heart. And a lot of people in Bitcoin think that Bitcoin is this purifying tool in that, like, just because Bitcoin exists, like, you're going to be able to remove like bad actors. And I think what's important to understand is that Bitcoin is freedom money. You're not, just because we have a better system of money does not de facto instantly mean we're going to only have good things that are coming from that. And that was kind of more of my point of that. I think a lot of time in Bitcoin, people talk about like hyper Bitcoinization. And it's this really funny thing because it's almost like this wish casting or kind of like heaven projection. Because it's like, and then hyper Bitcoinization. All of the shitcoiners and everyone we didn't like, they're all going to go to shitcoin hell, and we're all going to like have this rapture event where we instantly win. And that whole podcast was just talking about the fact that serious like changes in the way like society works and like they are never that clean and easy. And just to be understanding that, I view it as something that's incumbent on me is that Bitcoin is a tool, but it is not the end of itself. Like it's a tool and a means to an end for me personally, but it's not the end outcome of my life or my mission. So I think that's just kind of like as a general thing to make sure. I think the internet is really amazing at compounding growth among social groups because you get a lot of quick interaction, something that may have taken years of writing letters back and forth or going to the town square. From sitting in my house, I can sit and get all of this information data exchange of people who are agreeing with me, which is great for building social movements and like mimetic warfare. But it's just important to make sure that you're kind of piercing through that echo chamber and you're just realizing that, life's just really complicated and bad people are going to use Bitcoin for bad things. And just because Bitcoin exists isn't going to kind of remove that malevolence of man.
Yeah, and that's something I just recently had a discussion or a debate with George Gammon last week, and so the listeners can head on over and check that out. But that's one of his biggest points. He always says, just because you have perfect money, it doesn't, it might change a couple of things in regards to the incentives, but we still have imperfect humans who are going to try and manipulate that perfect money. So yep. I thought that was a great discussion you did with Peter. It's something that most of us don't really think about. Yeah,
thank you very much. I almost should like pull up the meeting notes to from that podcast to see if there was anything else that came up. But yeah, I find it it's one of these when you're just around Bitcoin for long enough, you just start getting a better sense of like what the general like everyone has these kind of refrains of like if this then that, and you're like and like a very common one is good times create soft men create bad times create good men. It's like I think there is validity in that thesis, but you want to make sure that you as the individual are going through those thoughts and you're not letting the meme do the thinking for you. You still want to kind of put yourself through that journey and understanding how this is like, it's just very incredible that like the internet has this great way of kind of compressing down truth, which are memes. I generally feel like very successful memes are things that just go viral because everyone can relate to them. But you want to make sure that you are still the driver in your own head and your own conscious, and you're going through that thought process and making sure that you're not taking shortcuts by hearing other people's memes and trying to integrate them as your own. It's kind of this whole thing that you need to be able to actively go through that journey yourself. And I think that's just a good muscle for every person. And this is where I actually, honestly, I often find myself on different parts of the internet of people I disagree with, because if I can kind of quickly triangulate and I know what you're going to say, and then I'm going to say something, and then I know how you're going to respond to what I say, I'm always trying to get new information. That's always what I'm doing. I often get Matt Odell is actually mocking me because I listen to podcasts. I listen to Bitcoin podcasts at 2x speed. And it's not that I don't want to listen or pay attention. It's just that when it's information that I'm kind of already in the same context and I already kind of have a vibe of what's going on, I don't need to listen to the beat by beat. But the moment there's something that is new information to me or someone challenges my worldview, I'll rewind it and I'll go back to 1x speed and I'll slowly digest it and think about it, right? So I'm always I'm scanning for new information, which is its own problem too, because you can't always be on the hunt for new information. As I made the comment before, you want to be in your own head, in your own driver's seat, thinking through these mental models and memes and kind of complex systems. You want to make sure that you're in your own driver's seat, right? So it's always this fun balance of get new information, challenge your worldviews, actively reevaluate your mental models. And it's kind of a bit of a song and dance going back and forth on that. That's just a bit of how my brain works, the way I kind of keep myself engaged in Bitcoin after 10 years, always trying to find something new to think about.
Yeah, I think you've been in Bitcoin for just about double how long I've been in Bitcoin. I think I'm probably 6 years now, but you always, the thing about Bitcoin, you always have a thirst to find more knowledge. And I think 2x speed is a little filter I use myself. I do the exact same thing with, I do the same thing on Audible. I try to read 20 or 30 a year, but I will skim through most of them, and it's very rare that I actually stop and read one at 1x speed. But the one that I found a lot of value in, I'll probably read twice at 1x speed. So it is a great filter.
For books on Audible, I may do like 1.25 to like 1.4. I don't usually go, because if I'm trying to follow a narrative, I'm trying to like mellow in it a bit. Whereas I feel like conversational, like podcasts where it's conversation, everyone kind of speaks in shorthand. There's a lot of filler words. There's less thought, kind of making it a very compact, dense work. So you're able to get away with that faster speed. I got into Bitcoin in 2013, the end of 2013. I had buddies that were mining Dogecoin. I was like, haha, isn't this a joke? And I was like, oh yeah, haha. Like I was on GPU mining, messing around with it. And I was like, let me learn more about how this actually works, because this kind of aligns with, I would say, my like libertarian, small government principles. I remember I was in college during the financial crisis, and I would go down to Wall Street, where Occupy Wall Street was, and I'd be watching all the protests. And I was very much just, the government messed this up by interfering with the money, and they're just going to keep printing money. And as someone who had not had kids at that point, but do now, was just very concerned about what's going to happen to this future purchasing power of money. So in 2013, I went to the New York City Bitcoin developer meetup, BitDevs, and I did not know how to program. I walked in that room. I was like, I am the dumbest person here by a wide mile. There's 30 people here. They're all brilliant programmers. We were going deep into C++ code and GitHub pull requests and talking about the latest issues in Bitcoin. And I knew it was a place I wanted to spend a lot of time in. It was just very invigorating, this idea of like trying to get new information, having so much information being thrown at you that you can't make heads or tails. And the way I learned a lot about Bitcoin in my early days was almost by osmosis. You would go, you'd get maybe 5 to 10% of the content. You'd go, and then next time maybe it'd be like 10 to 15%. It was just like the slow march over 2 years or so of just understanding how these systems work. And that was kind of the big jump off point for me, learning more about Bitcoin. And it's really funny because I'm still learning all the time. Like Bitcoin's such a big, complicated system now that there's no one person who understands all of it. And that's why there's always something fun and new to be able to, get deep in the weeds on it. It gives you an opportunity, if you want to put in the time, that you get to be a subject matter expert in some of these issues. And that's a really just empowering idea that it's still so early that this hasn't all been figured out, put into a comprehensive textbook for someone to be able to look up. It's just very fun. It's a fun space. I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
I feel the exact same about you. I feel the exact same as you there. Bitcoin, the rabbit hole, it's all encompassing. There's all these different aspects. You could look at it from a computer science aspect, a technological aspect, monetary history, economics. There's all sorts of different rabbit holes that Bitcoin just sends you down. And maybe we can end the conversation here on a couple of fun little rabbit holes that I always like to ask the listener about. So my first little rapid fire question I've got for you, Rob, is do you believe there are aliens out there?
Yeah, I do. I don't have any personal experience stories or close contact. I think I view it as a very largely a probabilistic thing where the universe is so large and expansive, and there's so much unexplored things that we don't know and understand, that it'd be, I view it as near approaching zero. Now, then you get to the question of like Fermi's paradox of, okay, well then why haven't any of them reached out to us? And for that, I say it's very possible that we, either are too slowly along. We haven't gotten to a level yet where we would get contact with someone, or you can make a case that in the infinite mass, it's a needle in a haystack, and that even if you had a lot of technology, maybe it would just take a long time. I haven't put like deep thought into it, but I would say, yeah, I'm more of a believer than that there's definitely some kind of foreign life out there. What exactly does that mean? It's kind of maybe more up to discussion, but yeah, definitely a believer.
Yeah, that's one hell of a rabbit hole. For the listeners, I'm interviewing Alex Svetsky this week, and if you're interested in the Great Filter and the Fermi Paradox, I'd highly encourage you to stay tuned for that interview, because he's written a phenomenal article exploring, the Great Filter, the Fermi Paradox, and not the Kardashev scale, the Nakamoto scale, as he calls it. So it's certainly an interesting rabbit hole. Before I go into my very last question, Rob, I'd like to actually let you kind of tell the listeners what you're doing. I read your great tweet thread there about your business, Ancho Watch. Or we touched on that earlier.
Anchor Watch, yeah.
What? I nearly said Anchor Risk for some reason. I don't know why.
So Anchor Watch Risk is our Twitter handle. Yeah.
There you go. That's why.
That's why.
So maybe tell the listeners where they can find you, and if they want to learn more about Bitcoin insurance, where's the best place for them to contact you?
So my Twitter handle is at ROB1HAM, Rob1Ham. Our website is anchorwatch.com. The word anchor, the word watch.com. And at the end of the day, the Twitter thread that Luke's mentioning is my pinned Twitter thread. You can find it on my profile. There is a very fundamental just gap in the financial services around Bitcoin right now where there isn't insurance. And the reason why, and kind of our large thesis, is that a lot of the traditional insurance players don't fully understand the technology. And we're just getting to a place now of Bitcoin as an asset class having enough kind of capital and support around it to be able to support a thing like insurance. And today, if you want to get insurance for your Bitcoin, you have like one of two options. One, you use multi-party computing, which is taking computers all across, the country in specialized boxes that are all connected to the internet, which is a cyber risk. So it's very not really the best thing you would want to have. Even if you're fracturing like a Shamir secret sharing, it's like fractions of keys. You'd rather not have the exposure risk to the internet at all. The second one then is like a specie insurance, where they just take, your seed plate or your hardware wallet and they just throw it in a vault with a bunch of gold bars. Our kind of thesis is that, Bitcoin can do better than that. So we're leveraging Miniscript and kind of, I would call multi-institutional multi-sig, building on some really cool technology that came out of the Blockstream team from 2018 for more robust internet, smart contracting. This is something that is going to be able to enable users to know for a fact that a counterparty like an exchange or us as the insurance company cannot run off with your money. Because you can set up a multi-sig, right, where let's say it's a 2 of 3 multi-sig, but you as the customer, your key has to sign. And now all of a sudden, for a fact that you don't have to worry about someone showing up with a $5, or you don't have to worry about people running off with your money like the custodian, because they can't move the money without your signature. Right. There's some really interesting security models that we're playing with, and we're hoping to be live by the end of the first half of this year. I'm hoping within the next month or so, I'm going to have some alpha testing locked to testnet only. Our wallet called Trident Wallet, Trident as in like a multi-pronged strategy approach, being able to kind of set up these custom vaults yourself. We're working very hard right now on the developer tooling and the user experience, because as great and empowering as this technology is, our core mission is making sure that people have knowledge and consent and comfort in putting their money into more advanced Bitcoin scripts and kind of withdrawing your money out. So that's kind of the technical tooling we're doing right now. So you can follow us there at anchorwatch.com, put your name down if you want to get on the list for alpha testing, or, follow myself on Twitter if you want to, hit me up. I have an open, my DMs are open on Twitter, so you can get me there at ROB, the number 1HAM, Rob1Ham. I know that was kind of a quick little ramble plug at the end, but I think I hit all the major beats.
It's good work. So please plug away. And when it's live, we'll have to get you back on the podcast. Links to everything, including the Twitter thread and the website, will be in the show notes for the listeners to check out. Rob, final little question I've got for you. Do you think it's a possibility that we're living in a simulation?
Is it possible? I could say it is possible. Do I think it's probable? I would lean closer to no. It's a funny paradox, though, when you're saying that there's definitely aliens out there, but we're definitely not in a simulation because you're assuming some level of technological progression beyond our means. For me, I think I don't know. It's tough because when we're talking about the simulation, I don't want to remove the agency of myself as an actor within my own story to remove responsibility from myself. So even if I did think it was a simulation, I don't think that allows me to abscond upon my responsibility of how I act as a member of society, right? So is it possible? Yeah, I don't think so. And maybe you could split that question into, do you think it is or not? And then would that actually change your behaviors and your actions? Because for me, even if I did think it was a simulation, I think that, there's a lot of meaning to be ascribed to the burden of living life with responsibility. And I think that a very common thing I've seen, I could be totally wrong, it's a generalized statement. When people think that they could be living in a simulation, they almost use that as like a get out of jail free card to pass off responsibility because they're like, oh, if it's all fake, it doesn't matter anyway. Like, somewhat of a strong man, I'll fully concede that. But the kind of the danger I see in viewing things as a simulation, I always want to be very careful of that, and that I know I have this one life to live, and maybe I'll die and all of a sudden I'll wake up at Chits and Blitz, the Rick and Morty arcade story where they just wake up and the whole thing was a simulation. But while I'm living this life, my best shot is giving it 100%, thinking that it's real. And that's kind of like, I think, the game theory optimal way of playing things. So possible we're in a simulation. I don't spend too much time thinking that we are. I'm just trying to continue working hard, being part of that change and improvement I want to see in the world. Even if it's a simulation.
I've gotten. No, that's a brilliant answer. I think, as Spetsky says, Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology.
Yep.
Rob, any final comments for the listeners before we shut this thing down?
No, thank you for having me on, Luke. It was a great conversation. Got to talk about all articles and stuff I've thought and written about in the past as a fun trip down memory lane for me. Anyone wants to reach out to me, my Twitter handle's at ROB, the number 1 HEM, Rob1Ham. My Twitter DMs are open. Always happy to have a conversation. Thanks for having me on, Luke.
Thanks for coming on, my friend. That was a thought-provoking interview, just as thought-provoking as your article. So listeners, go check it out. Thanks for coming. And that is all I've got time for you guys today. And if you did enjoy this video, feel free to slap a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you're notified for the upcoming interviews we have coming up. We're also going to be talking with Alex Spetsky about his recent article, Fire, Teleportation and Bitcoin. We're also going to be discussing what the Kardashev scale is and the Great Filter. So if any of that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you're notified for when those interviews drop. And final little reminder, guys, grab yourself $10 off a Foundation Passport. If you want a hardware wallet, you can use the link in the description to check out one of those. You can also get 10% off your Bitcoin Miami 2023 tickets if you use the promo code and the link in the description of today's show. And if you need any help setting up a hardware wallet like a Foundation or from any technical issues that you may be having, make sure you check out CoinBeast Connect. Everything is linked below. And without further ado, I hope you guys have a good day and I'll see you on the next video.